My name is Bastien Sachet, and I'm the CEO of Earthworm Foundation. Earthworm is a not-for-profit organization whose mission is the regeneration of the soils and the forests of our planet. We've done this for over 20 years by working with companies that are committed to change and helping them answer 3 key questions. In this series, we will discover the women and men who are asking these questions. Join me to learn more about what drives them and their ideas to regenerate our world. Today I have the pleasure to welcome David Croft. David is the Global Director for Sustainability, Environment and Human Rights at Reckitt. So Reckitt, some of you might not know, Reckitt is a global corporate, but you will certainly know the brands such as Durex or Dettol. And we've been working with Reckitt for a few years now. So David, can you tell us a little bit about you, about yourself? How do you got into that job?
Oh gosh, I mean, I've been at Reckitt now for nearly 3 years. I started out working in local government here in the UK. After about 3 or 4 years doing that job, I went to work for the Co-op in the UK. Now the Co-op is about the 5th biggest supermarket, and that sort of set me on a thread from there onwards, basically.
To continue, and we'll go back to that, but you studied, your bachelor was on environment science, your master's was on environment, and it's not like you've had a corporate career and then you turn to sustainability like we sometimes hear. You got it from the start. Where does that come from?
Yeah, then we're part of the ecosystem, we're part of the environment we live in. And how we relate to it, how we engage with it, how we support and sustain it is hugely important for now and for the long term. And that was an area of interest for me way back then.
Since you were a kid?
Since there, yeah. And then the second part of it was the people interaction of it.
I was always marked by the fact that you've put the emphasis on the people. Today, we hear a lot of companies focusing on the climate, on the climate pledge, the biodiversity and everything, but the people aspects tend to be present, but almost as an add-on. It's not on the front stage. So how do you do to bring it back to be a central matter
I think
in your day-to-day?
You make a really important point, Bastien, about that. We know the science of climate change. The challenge is not knowing that science. The challenge is creating change to halt climate change. And that's a people-centric conversation. We should be talking much more about the science of change, not just the science of climate change. And bringing different ways of motivating people to think about ecosystem preservation, ecosystem sustainability, ecosystem regeneration, climate change, preventing climate change. Fundamentally, it is about people who make choices.
So, I mean, in a big corporates like Reckitt, how do you do to put people at the center in practice?
One way of creating change is to create that personal reason to have more skin in the game. Everything as small as the lights being switched off or the conveyor belt not running when it doesn't need to run, all of that becomes important to be as efficient as we can and then showing the link. And if you go to the factories, you can see how much they've improved their energy performance over recent years. So we've set indicators and we show that performance ongoing, and then we increasingly call it out and talk about it. I mean, if you look at some of our annual reports, you'll see case studies of how individual factories or people in different parts, maybe design of a packaging, how we've reduced plastic, people in a factory, how they've reduced energy or saved water. People in the supply chain have worked to preserve ecosystems that they're part of. We highlight those personal stories, and the more we do that, the more you create that momentum.
When you look at your 3 years, where do you think is your biggest success? If you look, you mentioned the impact through the products and through the consumers, to the consumers, but you've worked a lot as well on the supply chain upstream. Where do you think your biggest victory has been, or an example of what you're the most proud of?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, I think at a sort of broad strategic level, what we have seen in the last 3 years is a much greater visibility of the environment, social and governance, the ESG agenda, the non-financial performance.
Yes.
When I start to look at specific programs, the one that really excites me is the work that we're doing with small farmers in southern Thailand and also plantation workers in Malaysia on rubber. A program we have with you, of course, and we've had that program for some time, but we've changed gear on it by bringing in the fair rubber context to that supply chain. We've shifted gear, and it's become a conversation that's about what matters to those small farmers, what matters to those plantation workers, and how are they part of a sustainable value chain for the future.
When you look at the other success that you mentioned, which is bringing the sustainability elements right up at the top level of the company and making it a key priority for the journey, what were your key recipes? How did you do it? Because it's a systems change, it's a behavior change. Of course, there is a context that helps. I mean, everyone's seeing climate change, so I don't think there is any decision maker today who's talking to investors, looking at the media, who can ignore that. But how did you cultivate that very concretely? How do you do it within the company?
Well, one of the other shifts within Reckitt with our new business strategy, with our new CEO, is that we're very much evolving to a broader group of stakeholders. Thinking about what is the role that we need to play and what are the deliverables, the outcomes we want to create that are beneficial, impactful for Reckitt, but also impactful for those other stakeholders, and what that means in terms of, well, let's just take ecosystems, for example, or climate change, or human rights, all of which are core areas of interest, not just to tightly focused investors, but to the broad spectrum. And I have seen a step change in the last few years of investor interest, very focused investor interest. I mean, you hear now of some of the biggest funds excluding companies who aren't delivering on their climate change pledge and divesting themselves of them. So it's not just the more sustainability-centered funds, it's mainstream funds.
When we talk about nature, we talk about farmers, especially in remote places, rural areas in the world. There's not always that knowledge. How do you do for people to relate to that in the business?
It's about telling the story, building a narrative that makes that relationship real for people, who might be 10,000 miles away on the other side of the world.
And how do you do that?
And well, you start off by going to visit and having those conversations with plantation workers. And I've spent time.
So you wonder.
I've been on the ground with the farmers in Thailand, with the plantation workers, spending time with them at a very personal level. The lady I spoke to was providing barley for Diageo in Ethiopia. The fact that the extra income through the extra barley she was able to grow because of the agronomy support we provided, the better seed, the better plant material that she had, meant that her livelihoods went up, the income went up, and she was able to keep 4 children in school. As a single parent, a single woman parent in Ethiopia, that was a huge change. But being able to talk about those personal stories, having experienced them, have talked with people on the ground, is hugely important. It has to be underpinned by the right technical rationale, the business rationale, but you can't really build the business case until you understand what are the risks and opportunities at a personal level for people at the heart of value chains.
We've talked about the successes. What's your biggest struggle? Where is it difficult?
Look, there are day-to-day challenges, and I think maybe you touched on it before, the short term versus the longer term. Yeah. That is a pressure. We all know that. We all face that. One of the biggest challenges we've had over the past 12 months is, of course, the inability to travel, to spend time on the ground, to get programs moving, to drive activity. And we've all had to learn new skills. We're getting there. But I think we all want to get on the ground again and work with people in the communities.
And if you look at today the ambition that you've set and the company has set and where you're at, what do you think is the biggest gap? What would be the most difficult for the company to realize and why?
I think it's going to be around the mechanics sometimes of what happens between the farm and our factory. how we can make certain that the 2 or 3 other steps that exist, and we're lucky, there's probably only 2 steps between the farmer, the rubber tapper, if you like, and receipt at our factory. But making certain we link those 2 steps together, that's vertical engagement though, isn't it? It's having a partnership that runs the length of the value chain, as opposed to, oh, let's go and do something nice.
Because what was interesting is, you know, on some products where you have a huge campaigns, media campaigns on the issues that these products face, you understand companies have to do something. But on latex for condoms, there's not been huge campaign activism. It's basically something that you've started and said, look, with a brand, we want to go at that and we want to understand and drive change. So it's been a journey that was self-initiated, I would say.
Well, maybe so, and we're not alone as a condom manufacturer, a condom brand within the Fair Rubber Association, of course. There's some other smaller brands. But my sense is that what we're doing with the farmers, the well-being of the farmers, their families, is absolutely synonymous with the values of Durex as a brand, which is about the well-being of people.
One thing that always struck me with you is that you listen first. So you go in the field to understand, you listen to people. We see a lot of leaders talking and saying how it should be and how they want things to be. But I've seen with you on all the topics that you've looked at, always this kind of approach.
I guess, you know, if I think about it, when I was doing that work with local government, you were hearing people's concerns, people's problems, and you were trying to find a way of solving those. I was trying to find a way of solving those in a way that worked for them, but also maintain the local community and how things could work. So perhaps it comes from that. I begin from the premise that why would I have all the answers in the first place anyway?
So you team up with your suppliers, you team up with your procurement, you team up with leadership. You hear their expectations, and I can imagine sometimes all the tension is centered in you, or the different expectations. So how do you manage that on the day-to-day? How do you deal with that level of tension of being in between worlds in a way? Well,
I try and create, first of all, collaboration, and using shared goals to deliver that. So what's our goal here, and how do we get the best balance for the different stakeholders around the table? Because whenever you create partnerships, for me it seems that it's not about winning and losing, it's about everybody benefiting.
Of course. We mentioned the challenges of bringing everyone along the way. How do you personally regenerate?
I'm a big believer that you cannot give of your best if you don't have some element of regeneration. And I've just come back from a week's vacation playing golf in Scotland. Playing golf very badly, I should point out, but nonetheless playing golf in Scotland. I like to get out and I like to get outdoors. You know, I'm fortunate to live in a small village. I can cycle, I can walk, I can run. A garden, you know, things like that are really important because it allows you to decompress. You can't give of your best in a work situation if you don't make time for yourself elsewhere.
There's a question I always ask to our guests. At Earthworm, we've got 5 key values, and this is always a question I like to ask, which are truth, honesty, courage, compassion, respect, humility. So I would like to know which one you identify the most with.
Oh gosh, I mean, compassion, I think. I think, you know, there are only 4 or 5 core global values. You talk about compassion, global values talk about community. It's the same principle. It's about understanding and caring for the people around you. And if you like, that's the full circle conversation. People are at the heart of what makes this world tick. If you have compassion and understanding for other people, then you've got a greater chance of making the whole thing work better.
I think that's a great conclusion. Thank you, David. It was a pleasure today to be with you.
Nice to.